Welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 84, an interview with Rachel Baker. Powell Flutes has crafted handmade flutes and piccolos in the Boston area since 1927. From the intermediate Powell sonare to the professional handmade custom, the highest level of attention is given to creating artistic quality instruments reflective of Boston's flute heritage. Powell's dedication to the balance of tradition and innovation results in flutes, head joints, and piccolos that combine the coveted Powell sound with the demands of the modern flutist. This commitment to excellence has resulted in internationally acclaimed instruments that have made the Powell sound the gold standard amongst musicians around the world. Visit powellflutes.com to see their entire line of instruments and to find the dealer nearest you. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Flute 360 podcast episode. Today, I have the wonderful Rachel Baker, who is Powell's repair woman. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Heidi. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, for sure. For the listeners out there who may not have listened to last week's episode, please check out episode 83, where Rachel so kindly shares what her profession looks like, and for anybody who's interested in diving into the field of repairing flutes. So check out episode 83 if you have not done so already. So for today's episode, we are actually going to talk about maintaining and repairing your instrument and what that looks like. Of course, for the expert, not for all of us to go in there with screwdrivers, but what that looks like. And we get to ask an expert in the field to see what she says about the questions you've submitted, in addition to my questions as well. What is the best advice you can give us flutists in properly maintaining our instruments?
Right. So maintenance is just really important in general, and it is going to vary depending upon how often the player is using their flute. It's always really important to swab your flute out after playing it, which I think most people know, and better to put it back in the case than leaving it out. Leaving it out is just, it doesn't do well for the pads to just stay out in the air. And then also there should be a schedule when they bring their flutes in for maintenance. If you haven't brought your flute in the past 5 years, it's just too long. Yeah, it's just important that as a flute player, you pick a schedule to get your flute maintained and treating your flute as an investment because you do rely on it. And most people do play on it quite a lot. So anything that you play multiple hours, multiple days a week, you really do want to make sure that it's always going to be ready and in working condition when you want to play it.
No, that's really good advice. Yeah, 5 years is a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not recommend that. So maintenance-wise, what is the biggest no-no that one can do or not do to our instrument?
Yeah, so this is going to sound silly, but not having it maintained.
Okay.
So I see this all the time as people have their student flutes that they're like, well, I played my student flute for 10 years and it never needed to go in. And then they get the nicer flutes and then they're like, oh, well, I just didn't ever think that you would need to have it worked on. And there's just a lot of things that make, a higher end flute, even just a student flute, you do need things changed, like the head joint cork. Cork is a natural material and it will dry out or get waterlogged because you're blowing a lot of moisture in your flute. And cork should be replaced every 1 to 2 years if you're playing a flute regularly. So even if you think your flute is working perfectly, at least go in every 1 to 2 years to get the cork changed. And then, maybe somebody could say, oh, well, you might need this or everything is fine. But even just something as simple as getting the head joint cork changed can make a big difference in your sound.
Awesome. So because there are so many options out there, sometimes I cringe when I see a student come in with a particular internal swab or external rag just because of all of the lint that comes off of it. Yeah. So for the internal swab and external cloth, what are your recommendations?
For the internal swab, we just use cheesecloth, which you can get at any kitchen store because it's really absorbent. It doesn't really there's no lint, and it's pretty cheap to replace. Like you said, lint is bad because, it could get stuck in the mechanism somewhere and you could have it floating around and maybe it would ruin your adjustments and everything. And then for the external cloth, as long as it's like a smooth, like a microfiber or an ultra suede, nothing that's linty or nothing that's like, cotton's kind of scratchy too, so I don't generally recommend cotton. And most of the times you can clean the swabs. You don't like both of them, you can clean them. So it's not like you have to constantly buy new ones, just as long as you use an unscented detergent and no fabric softener.
Awesome. And then in continuation with our cleaning supplies, let's talk about our pads. So what do you, the big question of the hour.
I know, everybody likes to talk about pads.
Yeah, the listeners are going to see or hear a slew of questions coming up here about pads that you've all submitted. So what do you recommend, the cigarette paper or the reusable pad dryer?
So if the purpose is to, just remove some of the excess moisture from the pad, I always just use the cigarette paper, just like blotting it, just, closing the pad over it and then opening it. You should never pull the paper.
Yeah, that makes me cringe. For students out there who might be a little younger, why do we not want to use the powder cigarette paper?
Oh, so this can actually get coated in other places. So the powder can not just clump, and that can cause sealing adjustments or just random pad sealing issues, but it can just make a mess of everything. You should just stay away from anything that's going to leave extra little stuff all over your flute.
No, yeah, that makes sense. And then talk about things that make me cringe. I was at a summer camp about 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a co-teacher there, and she went to go and blot the pad to wipe away the, excessive saliva. And she kept the key pressed down and pulled the pad paper. And I said, why would you do that? And she said, oh, well, student flutes, their pads are thicker and they can quote unquote take it. And I said, no, you have to lift the key and then pull out the pad paper. Please tell me that, there's no such thing as student flutes and the pads being thicker, correct?
Well, technically student flute pads are thicker, but that doesn't really have any,
bearing.
But on the whole situation. So student flute pads are usually cardboard backing, a thick piece of felt, and then a bladder skin wrapping, and a lot of handmade flutes can also have, a felt pad like that. And a lot of them have the synthetic pads, which have plastic backing, microfiber, and the skin, but they both have the same skin. So it's not really like the interior thickness makes any difference. It's still, you're abrading the pad skin when you pull the paper, because the paper is a much harsher surface than the pad. The skin is pretty delicate. So I don't know why it would make it, it's just a bad idea. You don't want to ruin the skin.
I was just like, well, that makes sense that maybe the student pads are, I guess, more durable. But like you said, the pads or the paper is thick. And so whether when you pull it out, it's going to tear something.
Yeah, and it might not tear it then, but you're definitely hastening the life of that pad.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. So you might have mentioned this earlier, talking about this in episode 83. How often should flutes have a COA completed?
So it's going to depend on how much a person plays. Usually for most players who are playing, an hour or two a day, a couple days, 4 to 5 days a week, every year is generally going to work for those players with an intermediate to higher end instrument. Because it's not just the pad seating and the adjustments. Like I said, it's the head joint cork, the oil and the mechanism, and just things settle over time. If you're only playing, once or twice a week, then you could usually get away with, every other year. But like I said, if you haven't had your head joint cork changed at least every 2 years, you should go in, and just ask your technician if, they can just take a quick glance to see if you need something more, but definitely get the head joint cork changed.
Awesome. Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. So does all of the advice that you have given earlier, does that apply also to the quote-unquote other flutes, such as piccolo, alto, etc.?
The head joint cork, yes.
Okay.
Piccolos, like the wooden piccolos, also have the added thing of needing to be oiled. I've seen piccolos that haven't been oiled in years, and you just feel bad for that wood as it's drying out. Because the moisture that you're blowing into the wooden instruments is actually, it's not hydrating the wood, so it's actually drying it out. So the piccolos, depending upon your climate, they should at least go in, every other year at least. The pad seating on these doesn't tend to go out as much because they're just not played as much. So usually, with piccolos, I'll see them every, couple of years, and then I'll just tell them, just bring it in for a quick oiling, and then, we don't have to do anything else, just, save costs. And altos and basses, it's the same thing with the head joint cork, and, I'll take a quick glance, and a lot of times they don't need a lot of adjustment, but it's always good just, for peace of mind to get things checked over quickly.
Awesome. So as a technician, and you mentioned this in episode 83, you get to see and work on a variety of different flutes and different makers. So is there a general public announcement that you would like to give flutists about repair and maintenance of their particular instrument?
Yeah, that they should just do it.
Okay.
just have your flute checked. And the other thing is, a lot of people seem to think that, pads don't need to be replaced that often. And they actually, they do. People are like, oh, I've had these pads in my flutes for 15 years and it's sealing fine. Well, maybe it's sealing fine, but the pads do dry out. They do kind of lose some of their resonance as well. So if you haven't had any pads changed, then, you're not getting the best sound out of your flute that you could get.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, things just wear out. Yeah, it's kind of like socks. Like you can wear the same socks for, multiple years, but eventually they start getting thinner and they get, all stretched out. And it's kind of like the same, sort of analogy with pads. Like, yeah, they maybe still work as pads, but they're not going to give you the best sound.
I love that analogy pertaining to the socks. I've never heard that before. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking of something with like elastic, like leggings. Us girls like leggings to put underneath our dresses or something. And I can just see that elastic band in the waist just getting more loose.
Yeah, it gets used and it's, and so maybe it still works. You can still wear them as leggings, but they're not acting as well as they should.
Nice. So I have a slew of social media questions for you if you're up for it.
Sure, let's go ahead.
Cool. So there were a lot of creative ones that came in. So Nicole Chamberlain, as you know, Powell artist and composer, she asks, what has been her most nerve-wracking repair and how did she cope?
Nerve-wracking. So maybe early on, I used to get nervous about doing things, but, at this point in my career, nothing makes me really nervous anymore. Like, everything is just like, I have enough skills that anything that comes in, I can handle. Like, people have sent flutes that they've sat on. And I'm just like, all right, well, we can make this better. And I just go and the customer's always more nervous than I am about everything. So it's just kind of nice having, as much experience as I do. It's just like another thing, like, oh yeah, I've seen this, it's fine. And then I fix it, dents, that's fine. Yeah, luckily I don't really get nervous anymore.
That's good.
Yeah.
Hilary Abigana, also a Powell artist and through the Fourth Wall Ensemble, she writes, I love to hear about her most nightmarish repair job that turned out okay? Also, what flute has she repaired that sparked the most joy for her? Lastly, what is the most common element that needs fixing?
Oh, all right. All the things.
All the things.
Yeah. So like some of the things that like make me cringe the most are people who try to use liquid polish on their flute and it gets everywhere. And it's just, that's kind of a nightmare. You know, it could have been a simple fix, but now they've gone and just, you know, gotten this liquid polish everywhere and now it needs a complete overhaul. And it's not just a nightmare for me at that point. Now it's a nightmare for the customer who now has to pay and get their flute overhauled. So that's a nightmare. And then there was this one head joint, like, so there was this flute. I was working on this Powell flute and I had checked all the tone holes, all the pads, everything was great, but there was this weird overtone happening and I just couldn't figure out what it was. And so, you know, I finally isolated it to the head joint and I'm like, well, maybe the riser's leaking. And eventually I was just, you know, trying to blow some air through the head joint. And there's actually a pinhole leak just in the metal tubing. And it was just the craziest thing. So it was, and yeah, I don't know. I've never seen that before, but it was just a weak spot in the metal and it had just created this tiny little hole. So we managed to plug that with a little bit of silver solder and actually save this 14 karat head joint. So
wow.
Yeah, that was unique.
That is unique.
Yeah, but like, it's just, you have to problem solve so many different things. And like, without the experience, I would have never been able to, you know, isolate it down to something and trust myself that the rest of the flute was fine. So,
yeah. Wow.
So let's see, joy. Oh, so I had this customer who traveled from Europe for a week to have her flute overhauled. And, you know, a week's not a lot of time for an overhaul, but traveling from Europe, I was like, all right, I'll get this done. So, you know, I basically cleared my schedule. So she had had this flute for years and years, and she had just had it overhauled in Europe, and she was just so unhappy because it didn't sound like her flute. She thought she was going to have to sell it and get a new flute. So when she got here, I was like, oh, okay. You know, I took a look at it. I was just like, yeah, it's just, you know, poorly. It was just a bad overhaul. So I was like, no problem. I can take care of this. So, you know, I spent the whole week working on her flute and playing it, fixing it, playing it, and did the overhaul. And she came and she picked it up and she played it and she just started crying. Like, she was just so happy to have her flute back to the way it sounded before. And it just made me so happy.
Oh, wow. Yeah. There's nothing like being reunited with your voice, you know, the instrument that you relate to and it resonates with you.
Yeah, and like, she just thought she was going to have to get a new flute, and it had been her flute for years. So I was really just so happy that I could, you know, bring her flute back for her.
Oh, how wonderful. Eric Tucker writes, is there anything that we as flutists can do to prevent sticky pads in damp, humid weather?
So sticky pads is like a whole number of issues. So one, it is the moisture and the climate. And then also, you know, it starts because, you know, you're blowing moisture into the flute. So obviously, you know, brushing your teeth and not drinking anything with sugar or anything is going to be helpful, because all the air that you're blowing in there, everything that is, you know, you put into your body is going to come through that air and will settle on the pads and on the tone holes. And then also, you know, washing your hands is good, because sometimes your hand oils can migrate around to the pads and cause issues as well. So even, I know a lot of people just like, well, cigarette paper works to blot out some of the moisture, but it doesn't always get rid of the sticking. And that's just the thing. Like, paper is not technically a good way of cleaning a tone hole or a pad. So a lot of times, you know, to get rid of the, you know, constant sticking, you do have to, you know, have it, the tone hole and the pads cleaned, which, you know, you can have done during your yearly maintenance. And then sometimes the pad skin, because it is just a skin, it's a natural material, it's a bladder skin, it will just get to the point where it just gets so worn out and it's just so laden with, you know, the moisture over time that you just have to replace the pad to get rid of the chronic sticking. And that's just one of the things. Pads don't last forever.
Yeah, what great advice. Thank you. And then Viviana Completo Wilson, who is another Powell artist, wrote, what are some common bad habits we have that affect our flute's maintenance? Why do some pads seem to get stickier than others? And why... Man, we're all about those pads, aren't we?
Yeah. And
why is it that when some pads get sticky, they never want to unstick?
Yeah, so basically, I guess sort of just answered that question. It's probably because those pads have not been replaced in a long time and the skins are worn out.
Okay.
And a lot of times it's the pads that are, closed that have the biggest issues, like the G sharp, the trills, the D sharp, the C1 that's right at the top of the flute. It's the ones that are going to collect the most, moisture, and the ones that are closed and on the bottom of the flute, because, the bottom of the flute is resting and that's where the moisture is going to gather. So, if you can obviously swab your flute out every hour or so, even more soon, like sooner than that if you have the time, because if you look at your flute after like 15 minutes, you will notice that the moisture goes all the way down. So, it's just the nature of the flute, and you just have to deal with it. And like I said, pads don't last forever. So if they're chronically sticky, then they probably just need to be replaced at that point.
Okay. I think it's interesting. I'm having like a full circle moment in my brain. And that is back in series 3 for Flute 360, I talked to a flute maker. And I asked him, what is your public announcement to the community? And he said, keep your pads dry. So this sounds like a full circle for me. It's impossible really, because you're playing. You can't stop the middle of your concert and be like, hey, wait. I have to dry my pads out before I continue playing. So, we all understand it. And that's just why, you have to get maintenance, because you can replace 1 or 2 pads that, your yearly maintenance, you don't have to replace all of them at once. And, it's not the end of the world. Pads are good. They're good to be replaced. You don't have to live with them forever. Yeah. I like that friendly reminder. It's replaceable.
Your flute will thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you for answering all of those questions. And I know the listeners will really get a kick out of hearing their question being answered.
I know. All these pad questions. So many pads.
That's so funny. So for this episode, you gave a great recommendation for episode 83. But do you have another pick for today?
Sure. So let's do something completely different. And one of my favorite shows, and they're just going to have a movie come out in the next couple of months. It's called Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries. It's just very entertaining, and I'm very pleased with it.
Neat. I like mysteries and detective genres, so that's something I will definitely have to check out. Perfect. Awesome. And my pick, again, because I was just pickless this week, I guess. I asked my husband, Eric, and he has 2 picks. One, downtime. So just finding some silence in your life and chilling out. And the second is flounder stuffed with crab cakes.
Oh.
Yeah. So they've been fishing. My brother-in-laws and my husband have been going down to the bay every day and fly fishing in the evening. And my husband caught the biggest flounder 2 days ago. And so my brother-in-law, Shane, actually cooked it up and he got real fancy with it. He made homemade crab cakes and then he stuffed the flounder with it and baked it. And it turned out delicious.
Wow, you're lucky.
I am very spoiled with my Big A family. So it's just like, whoa, you guys are just treating me so nicely. I'm not going to want to leave. Oh, shoot. Do you like to cook?
Yeah, I prefer baking, but I definitely cook. So
yeah. What's your favorite thing to bake?
Ooh, I really like Victoria sponges.
Oh, yum.
Yeah, they're so delicious because there's so many just good things all in, a couple layers.
Can't go wrong with that. Well, thank you, Rachel, for your time, energy, and talents. And we so appreciate asking you these deep questions and you giving us your advice. And we so appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for doing this podcast. It's so great to hear all the different aspects of the flute world.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Well, you have a wonderful evening and we'll be in touch soon. And for those who have not heard episode 83, go back 1 week and check out Rachel Baker's interview on her career.
Bye, Heidi.
Bye, Rachel. Today's bronze sponsorship is brought to you by Aransas Pass High School. Aransas Pass High School is the winner of the Flute 360 podcast October giveaway. The band and the directors have been working very diligently on their upcoming performances. They would like for you to know about their upcoming concerts. such as the Gregory Portland Tournament of Bands held on October 5th at 1:30 p.m. Also, on October 12th, they have a South Texas Crossroads Marching Festival at Robstown High School at 3:15 p.m. On October 19th, their UIL Region 14 Marching Contest at Sinton High School at 11:30 a.m. In conclusion, they have a Christmas concert on the 9th of December at 6:30 p.m. and an exciting event of their all-region concert at Texas A&M Kingsville on December 14th at 3 p.m. Central U.S. time. If you would like to support the band, please visit www.apisd.org/boosterclub. I know that they would really appreciate the financial support in any amount that you can give. Congratulations again to the school, the students, and the band directors. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.